Welcome to Strange Tales Weekly. I'm Jess. Joining me, as always, is Eric and Joe, and we'd like to welcome our guest today, Mark Hoffman.
Hey, Mark, how are you?
I'm doing fine. I just came in from the garden for a bit.
Tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I grew up on a farm in Kansas, a wheat and cattle farm. And so we raised, obviously, wheat. We raised cattle, hogs, chickens, turkeys, ducks, occasionally some geese, all these kinds of things. And so we learned, and basically, we raised all of our own meat. So, and we butchered all our own meat. So every year, I have 5 brothers and 2 sisters. So we had a big family. So we went through a lot of food, and my family, the boys in my family are all pretty big. I'm the smallest one, and I'm like 6'2". So we ate a lot of food, and every year we would like butcher 2 big full-grown beef a year on the farm, and like one in the fall, one in the spring, and then we would let it hang. We'd cut it up, and we'd also butcher probably a couple of really large pigs, maybe 250 pounds. And then my grandparents got involved because they'd done this, this was like heritage, this was an old German approach to raising your own food. And then so we would make our own hams and bacons, and my dad would make like 100 rings of smoked sausage, and we had a building we could smoke it in with like mulberry wood. It was really good. It was kind of a favorite of ours. He made liverwurst sausage and bloodwurst. It was a big project whenever we butchered the pigs, because we would like butcher the beef on one weekend, and then later that week we would butcher the hogs, and then we would use the meat from both of them to create sausages. But it was, and then we would process all the fat to make lard, and we'd cook with lard. And so that's just how we grew up. I remember when I was in high school one year, my dad says, "Mark, I'm gonna take you out of school for 2 days, and you're gonna help me butcher pigs." And he said, "You're gonna learn a lot more butchering these pigs than you're ever going to learn in school those 2 days." And, I look back on that and I think, well, you know what? I have no idea what I would have covered in school that day, but I sure remember how to butcher a pig. So I've been kind of doing it off and on ever since. And I find that very few people know how to do this unless they work in a slaughterhouse, which wasn't the way life used to be out in the countryside. So I got to learn some skills that, most people never got to learn because of that. And I've recognized that through most of my life. We did a lot of hard work on the farm, baling hay and, feeding all the animals. Animals are a lot of work, sitting on a tractor to raise grain is easy, but the animals, it can be a lot of work. But it was a great education in that regard. So we had a garden, and we always raised quite a bit of food, not as much as my wife and I do now, but we did raise quite a bit of food. I don't have really access to do much in the way of animals here, although we have some chickens and some guinea fowl, and I have specific reasons for those 2 particular types of fowl. Anyway, that's kind of how I grew up. And after that, then I went off to college and studied engineering and got an engineering degree. And then after I got my engineering degree, I just really didn't feel like going to go work in some office job or something, and so I just couldn't do that. Yeah, I guess maybe I had a little too much of Dave Childress in me. So I joined the Peace Corps, and I went overseas, and I was in the Philippines for 2 years, and I was working in a nutrition program. If you can call it work. It's actually the hard part about being in the Peace Corps really is, at that time for me anyway, was basically I called myself a mini ambassador, because I spent a year just learning the language and figuring out where I was and what I could do. And then the second year, I tried to actually initiate some programs and activities that would be beneficial. We ended up building a water system, or actually, I didn't build it. They wouldn't let me build it, but I wrote a grant to get the piping and the concrete so they could construct it, because they just didn't have enough money. I think it was like a $3,000 grant. This was like back in 1981. And actually, we went back there. God, when was this? This was like 2017, I think. We went back to that barrio, and they showed me the water system. It was really cool, though, because it still worked after all these years. And however, it had an earthquake, and it damaged the flow of the spring, so they weren't getting much water. But they liked the system so much that not only did they dig wells and put in like 3 more of these systems for the barrio, but they also cordoned off the entire watershed so no one could pollute it, which I thought was really cool. So I was like, wow, this was great. Because before we did that, they had really bad water. They had kids out playing in mud holes that had schistosomiasis in them and all these kinds of parasites and other things. And schistosomiasis is a really nasty disease. It's a blood disease. It gets in your blood and then it goes into your brain and does things there you don't want to have happen. So, having a good water system there was definitely a good project to work on. But it was something I stumbled on and I just did. So I had a lot of freedom to do what I wanted there. And I learned the language and got to see live in a tropical country and see a bit of the world. And it was great. Yeah, and then I came back to the U.S. and actually, what happened while I was in the Peace Corps. So when you're in the Peace Corps, you have a lot of free time to read. And so I did a lot of reading. And interestingly, there's a lot of Peace Corps volunteers in the Philippines at that time. It was the largest Peace Corps operation for the U.S. at that time. And so there was like a book club, if you will, like a book library, a floating book library that came through. And so you could go to a certain person's house where they kind of got stored in your area and you could pick up books and read books. And one day I picked up this book because I know you're going to ask me, how did I end up in Estelle? And that has to do with being in the Peace Corps, and we can get on to other things here in a minute if you want. But I picked up this book in the book library, and this house and it was called The Ultimate Frontier by a guy by the name of, well, it's basically Richard Kinninger, the guy that started Stella. And so I read this book and I was just like captivated by this book, and I read it multiple times. And it was just because it opened my mind to so many issues and topics that I'd never thought much about, like ancient history of the planet and, the lost years of Jesus Christ and just all sorts of things, cataclysms of the planet, all this sort of things that I had never really heard much about, just a little bit, because my dad used to read some of those kinds of books. Like I think you read Worlds in Collision by Eric von Daniken, which when I was in high school I read, which I was fascinated by. So finding this book, which had a lot more introductory material, and it really fascinated me. And of course, at the end of the book, it says, well, we're going to try and build a community that is a more evolved community that, really has a strong educational component and attempts to create an environment and provide an educational program that would teach children to really, evolve in their lives. And so that really attracted me. So that's how I ended up moving back to when I came back to the U.S. and moved to Stell.
And what year was that?
That was 1982, late 1982. I was in the Peace Corps for 2 years.
And when did Stell start? That's about when Stell started?
Stell started in, actually the book was written in 63, and the community, they started building it in 73.
Oh, wow.
And it's had its early years, which I missed. The craziest part was kind of wild, I guess. And these types of communities that get founded around some, charismatic leader, which Richard Kinninger didn't, to me, fit the bill for a charismatic leader, but when you have that position, you can have power, I suppose, over some people, and some people would give him that, credibility. But he, unfortunately, as many of these types of people do, you might say he took liberties with women and kind of violated his authority. So that got him kicked out of the community a couple times. But that all happened before I arrived, and he was basically gone by the time that I got there.
Oh, really?
The community had been closed. It was only only available to people who actually were a part of the organization, the Stell group that they started. And but by the time I got there, that didn't apply, and anybody could go move there. So
when it started in the early 70s, it was here in Illinois?
Yeah, he was out from Chicago, and he wrote this book and said, and he was told, according to him, he was told all these things. And one of the things he was told was that he should start this community near Chicago, because Chicago would have a strong commercial and industrial base to support it, and that it was in a particular location where it would, from a geological standpoint, it would be safe from earthquakes. Because one of his predictions in this book was that in May of 2001, the Earth was going to undergo a pole shift. So that was part of his book. Of course, obviously that didn't happen. So, but a lot of people were all, hung up on that, you might say, and excited about it. But it wasn't what attracted me personally. I was much more interested in the creating a better civilization, if you will. And I was always very impressed with what the people had done there with the educational system, because they actually started training mothers before they even had their babies on how to raise a baby. And after the baby was born, as soon as it was born, they had all these various types of techniques they would to stimulate the baby's brain, and not just visually, but also with motor skills and such as this. And they had gone out specifically to this Better Baby Institute out in I think it was in somewhere in Pennsylvania. And this was all before I got there, and had studied with those people and brought that information back and started them on a Montessori school, and also actually a school that went all the way up to through high school at that time. And it was very small, but it was highly specialized in this areas, and I just was really impressed with it. Unfortunately, it's difficult to keep a school like that in, financially it's difficult to pull something like that off out here in this area of Illinois. As you know, Joe, economically, this is a tough place. Mm-hmm. It's really just an agricultural area out here. You have to get closer to Chicago, where the industry and the manufacturing is, and that's like an hour and a half from here. So it was a challenge. A lot of people had a hard time staying here because of the difficulty at having an income. Yeah.
But by the time you arrived, he was gone though.
Yeah, he was gone. He would come back like once every month or two and give a talk every once in a while. So, but that was about it. He'd basically burned his bridges, I think. And he was told supposedly to go build another community down in Texas. Mm-hmm. So this all happened before I got here. So he took about, I don't know, I guess it was like a third of the community, and they went to Texas with him, and the other 2/3 stayed in the community, and that's who was there when I was left. It was a very dynamic place at the time. It was kind of like being back at college. I mean, I'll never forget, I came here and lived in Stell at the time. I don't now, I'm just 2 miles down the road. But I came to Stell, and within 30 days, I knew everybody in the community. Of course, there's about 100 people, but that's, you can't move. I don't know of any town you can move to these days where you're going to know everybody in a month. But that's the way Stell was. So,
I guess it attracted some colorful characters.
Well, that's interesting, because for the most part, I would say it did not. Richard Kinniger, to me, was the colorful character. But after that, no, actually what it really attracted was a lot of forward-thinking entrepreneurial types. So, for example, Stell had a group of men who were specifically interested in the late 80s in photovoltaic electricity. So they and wind energy. This was way before any of this stuff was going on anywhere else in the country, really. So they got together, and Tim Wilhelm in particular was one of the ones who was involved in this. Steve Bell, John Hamey, some of these guys that were really involved in this, in installation, design, troubleshooting. Tim was the design guy. Mark Wilkerson lived here for a long time. He was into the sales. John was very much into and still is into the installation and troubleshooting. Anyway, so these guys put this all together, and they put up solar panels all over the community. And at one time, Stell had more solar panels than per capita or per household than certainly anywhere in the Midwest, any other town in the Midwest, and possibly in the entire country. I'm not sure, but it was very unusual. And also they put up a windmill to run the water treatment plant for the community, which is pretty rare. And they built a phone company that was totally solar powered. The only thing in the phone company that wasn't solar powered was the air conditioner. That was it. It's kind of hard to run an air conditioner on solar power, at least back in that time. So it was really pretty cool. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that was going on the technology side. And Tim was such an innovative guy. He went on to Kankakee Community College and designed you probably know Tim, I suppose, or at least heard of him, but designed the renewable energy program at KCC. And actually they kind of exported it all over the Midwest to various junior colleges. I don't know how successful they did that, but I know it was available and it was getting taken around to other junior colleges. So this is what I saw. You saw people coming out of here became authors, and just like Dave Childress, he came to Stell because of he came to Illinois, this area, because of Stell initially, and then of course he's basically a world renowned author and publisher. So I mean, he's just another example. But there were quite a few other people who moved on, and college professors and just all sorts of stuff. I mean, they would actually, this group of people who came who were kind of out of place, which made them a bit at odds. They didn't understand the local community and how because they all came from the cities. A lot of them were from the East Coast, West Coast. Living in the Midwest was just, they were kind of like fish out of water in some ways, and just didn't understand the local people. And so that creates, of course, you know how that is. That can create a schism between the local people. I talked to my neighbors about this, because I grew up in an area like this. So for me, it was no big deal to go hang out with the local farmers. If I could talk to them, and it's just kind of like going back home. But that wasn't true for most people. So I mean, I talked to my neighbors, and they're telling me about, oh yeah, when they started that community, we were getting together and we were trying to decide how we could make them go away, this kind of stuff. But in the end, because of the educational program, they ended up, the school didn't last forever. It just was too expensive, and there weren't enough students really. And so the students ended up in the local high school, and actually a number of them ended up being like the valedictorian of their class. But they had this opportunity for this level of education that most people just don't get. So that didn't really surprise me. Plus, the people who were living here, for the most part, when I moved here, were pretty well educated. Most of them were college graduates, and not all of them, most of them, a lot of entrepreneurs. So, like I say, it was a really dynamic place to me. And then on top of that, there were just like a line of spiritual teachers who came through Stell, because that kind of was aligned with the philosophy in a sense. So there's a lot of people who had been attracted here because of the spiritual nature of the book that Richard Kinninger had wrote. So, and that was always a strong component of the community. So to me, that was actually the most interesting part of the community, was that there were so many energy type healers and spiritual teachers coming through the community. It was a great opportunity. I don't even know where you could go at that time to find that. Maybe someplace in California. I don't know. Interesting. I used to think, it was one of the things I thought about when I went into the Peace Corps. I thought, man, it'd be really cool to find some like spiritual guides here in this country, away from, well, I didn't find that at all. Not really. I mean, maybe they had it up in the hills, but they would be more like animistic type, healers, if you will. And then I realized later on that, what, this country right here is where all of that. This is the hotbed for that, and I'm pretty sure it's because there's the freedom for it. I've done a lot of work in China recently for my job, and I thought, well, you can find that there in China, of course. That's where, Buddhism was strong, and Taoism, and all these religions. No, there's no religion to speak of in China. In fact, it's pretty much illegal. So, basically, you have to have a country that has freedom if you're going to have this kind of spiritual movement and exploration. And so this country here, the U.S., is really the hotbed for it, in my lifetime anyway. So, but that was one of my favorite parts about Stell. I really tried to take advantage of that. I learned Tai Chi and just lots of opportunities. And that's a whole other story in itself, I guess.
I heard
it had nothing to do with permaculture and sustainability, but on a personal level, it's definitely a sustainable thing. Yeah.
I heard there was like a theosophy influence. It was like a lot of Blavatsky type stuff.
Yeah, there was another it was one of the teachers that came through. He was big into the writings of Blavatsky, and he was teaching along those lines. He was an interesting guy. I never could quite figure him out. I listened to him talk many times. He had his own view on how the cosmology of this world is, which was different than what was in, Richard Kinninger's book, but very interesting still. So, but like, he was just one example, although he was a pretty prevalent character. He hung around for about 10 years and taught a group of people. He had some goal in mind with that group of people. I never could totally figure out what it was he was trying to do, but he kept talking about, well, it's not certain that we're going to make this work. There's someone that he communicate. This is one of these guys that said he could communicate. So he said with the other side, and based on a lot of things he said, it's kind of hard to argue with him. Of course, it's his experience. What do I know? But there was definitely an argument, as he put it, amongst the people who were guiding him, that it probably wasn't going to work. And I think probably in the end that's accurate. But hey, I don't know. I was just a kind of a bystander almost in the process, you might say.
So what is Stell like today then?
Well, I'm not really involved in Stell at this point, although for about 25 years I was very involved, and I was involved in a lot of the things that were focused on trying to bring sustainable education out of the community, because there were so many sustainability type activities going on. The only thing that really was missing, in my view, when I was from a sustainability standpoint, was the agricultural part of it. So I got kind of involved in that part and helped start a community garden in Stell back in, I don't know, 98. I think it was 98. And it's still going. I'm not involved in it. It's there's still people who are working in the community garden. I think community gardens are a fabulous idea. Every town should have one, in my opinion. But so we did that, and then we started a nonprofit organization called Center for Sustainable Community back in 2003 or 4. And at that time, hardly anybody in Illinois, even in Chicago, was doing a lot with sustainable education. So we started this and I took a class in permaculture back in 2003 out in California from a fellow by the name of Dave Bloom, who was at the time, one of the more prominent permaculture instructors out there. And then I came back and started talking about that with my friend Bill Wilson in particular, and he got really excited about it and wanted to have a class in Stell. So then we ended up having Dave come teach a class in Stell the next year, and that kind of launched a lot of movement in permaculture in the community, and Bill really kind of spearheaded that, and since then has started his own permaculture training company with his wife Becky. And so they've had quite a bit of success as far as I know. I'm not really involved in that. I had a lot of health problems, and I kind of had to, for the past 10 years, and I kind of had to step away from everything pretty much. But, they've been doing a lot of permaculture classes kind of all over the place. I think they even went to India recently. So, they've been spreading the word about it, and they've been doing they've got some projects in the Stell property on showing permaculture. I got some here of my own. I used to give permaculture talks in my yard, just introductions, and I could spend 3 hours just walking around the yard talking about various aspects of permaculture that you don't see any of it. You come to my yard, you'll never know until I start talking about it. And I can talk about some of that if you want. That's up to you.
What is permaculture exactly?
Well, permaculture is basically a design principle. There's multiple principles, but it's basically a design concept. It's all about design, really, and it has to do with trying to put the human into the environment, into nature, in a way that benefits both the human and nature without detracting from either one. That's fundamentally what it comes down to. So to do that, you have to look at all the various aspects of our lives and what's in nature, and see how nature functions. And so that requires having a very decent understanding of how nature works, and the plants, the animals, and particularly the energy flows, the wind, the temperatures, the time of sunlight. Because every ecosystem in every latitude and every elevation is different. So that's why permaculture is about design rather than about actual specifics, even though when you read books about permaculture, they're going to talk about specifics, but that's just to help you understand how to apply the design, really. So, I'll just give you an example. This room that I'm sitting in here is our sunroom. You've been here, so Joe, so you've seen it. But basically, one of the fundamental aspects that I think of when I think of as permaculture is how do you how do you best utilize the energy that reaches the earth? Okay, so what energy reaches the earth? Well, there's really everything. Everything came from the sun ultimately, even our fossil fuels, the sunlight that we have, the wind, you name it. There's only one thing that doesn't, and that's nuclear energy. That's a whole different matter. But when it comes to the sunlight, energy from a permaculture perspective, as I think of it, is you want to maximize your usage of sunlight and make the most of it. So that means in agricultural systems that you want to have an agricultural system that is always harvesting sunlight whenever it can. Obviously, in this climate right here in the Midwest, you can't do much of anything in the winter unless you have a building that's designed to take in sunlight into a greenhouse, and it's extremely well insulated to help you heat the building, so you could raise plants in it. You could do that. But even in this area, we're so far north that you'd even need extra light supplementation just to keep your plants alive. I'm pretty sure it's difficult. It's very difficult in this climate to get plants without supplemental heating to keep plants alive in a greenhouse. But so that means then is that in terms of harvesting the sunlight, what it really means is, from a permaculture standpoint, you try to rely as much as possible on perennials, which would be trees, bushes, vines, plants that grow every year. One of my favorite examples would be like asparagus, which I just picked a large bunch of asparagus today because it's starting to grow now, and because that's a perennial plant, and you can have my patch is from 1986 when I planted it, and I just picked a bunch like that this morning out of that patch. Um, and all you got to do is make sure it stays weeded. You should feed it some compost now and then, which I usually do with my every few years with some chicken compost manure. But that's really all you got to do is to keep it alive, and then all you got to do is harvest it. That's it, and you're done. And that's kind of one of the principles of permaculture, is to minimize the amount of work that you put into whatever you're doing. So if you can let nature do the work, which isn't necessarily just letting nature be a perennial plant, which is one primary role or function or utilization, you might say, in nature that humans can use. But also animals can perform a lot of functions. That's why I like to have guinea fowl, because the guinea fowl, they run around my yard. They eat all kinds of bugs. But guinea fowl are interesting because, I don't know if you're familiar with guinea fowl, but they're from Africa, and they're really not so well acclimated to the cold winters here, but they do great any other time here. They're kind of noisy and obnoxious, and a lot of people don't like them, but they produce absolutely fabulous eggs. If you wanted to keep them in the pen, you absolutely would have to cover the pen with fence, or they're going to fly out, because they can fly. And but to me, that's the whole purpose of them. Let them fly, let them go around the yard. They'll eat ticks, they'll eat all kinds of things, and they kind of keep a lot of bugs going out of the yard. Interestingly, they don't scratch mulch, which from a gardening standpoint is really cool, because that means you can just mulch everything. They'll leave it alone. A chicken, on the other hand, you don't want chickens in your garden, because they'll destroy everything, including the mulch, or your flower beds for that matter. But guineas, they don't bother anything. They just go around and they'll scratch bare dirt, but they will never scratch anyway. This is going to give you an idea about how you look at how animals can fit into the ecosystem that you're designing on the property, and that would be a permaculture aspect. So for me, from a permaculture perspective, my tick patrol is out there performing their role of eating. Now, that's not to say that I've never seen a tick in my yard, even when I had guineas, because I have. But they do. It's really interesting. I've seen them. They'll eat the seeds off of some of the grass, and they'll just put their mouth on it, and they'll just strip all the seeds off and eat them. They're kind of fun to watch, and they have very quirky personalities, you might say. Anyway, so like I say, we have guineas and chickens. We've tried ducks, but ducks are difficult because there's predators. There's a lot of coyotes. In fact, I had one in the backyard this morning when I got up. So they're definitely a problem with things like ducks, and then you have to lock them up every day. Chickens are just so much easier to take care of too. So, and of course they produce good eggs too. But I really like the guinea eggs because they walk around the yard and eat all sorts of natural diet, and their eggs are just fabulous. They're these tiny little eggs, about, I don't know, they're about 2/3 the size of a chicken egg. They look kind of cool. Anyway, so we've tried we tried geese and ducks, and our property's pretty small though, so we're not really situated for a lot of bigger livestock. Anyway, we're down the road from my friend Harry Carr, who's got a big organic animal farm, and we do a lot of trades with him with our bed and breakfast here. And we do he does farm tours, and then we do farm dinners. So people go a mile down the road to his farm for a tour, and then they come back to our place for the dinner, which we have chefs out of Chicago that make the dinner using his meats and vegetables from other organic growers that they're aligned with, or sometimes out of our garden. It depends. And boy, those have been some great meals. Unfortunately, nothing this year, so we had to cancel everything. But in the past, we've had some pretty cool. It's a lot of fun too. Go campfire later on. We have live music. Just be a quiet summer this year, I'm afraid. Although I think we're going to allow camping. My wife and I talked about this. I think there's no problem with having campers in the yard, but I don't think we can take the risk of letting people in the house. Honestly, people we don't know anyway. So
is that Mint Creek Farm?
Mint Creek Farm, exactly. Yeah.
Tell us about.
Yeah, he's been really busy this spring. Yeah, his meat orders for delivery are just skyrocketed, as you might imagine. So, and of course he's organic. There's only one place nearby that slaughters organically, and that's over here by Eureka, which is near Peoria. And it's a small place, so it's not as prone to having the problems that Smithfield and Tyson are having right now. But who knows? I mean, I don't know. They could have problems too. But the smaller operations are much easier to work with, which is a shame. We wouldn't be having all these meat problems if we hadn't centralized everything. When I grew up, there was a butcher and a meat locker in every town practically. And if we were back in that model, we wouldn't be seeing any problems with our meat supply right now. And the farmers wouldn't be, I don't know what you're reading, but I mean, the farmers are eliminating their chickens because they can't get them slaughtered. It's really pretty crazy. I mean, if there's some things we're going to learn out of this event that's going on to really reset us, I hope, and hopefully decentralize our society to a great extent, bring a lot of our manufacturing home, and certainly relocalize our agriculture, which would be really good.
Yeah, that could be a good opportunity for Stell and area to attract more people like this.
Maybe, yeah, that's quite possible. I don't know. That's entirely possible. Yeah. But more importantly, I think it would be really good for people to learn more about how to become more self-reliant and self-resilient and raise a little more of their own food. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to go out and do it yourself. I think it makes a lot more sense to do it in a community sense. If you're not familiar with it, for somebody like me, I'm probably set in my ways. I know how I want to do it. I mean, I'd be happy to work with a group of people who wanted to learn how to do things. And not to say I wouldn't learn something from them too, but yeah, I think that's a really good way to do it, because if you're starting out from scratch and especially if you don't have any property, it would be very challenging. One nice thing about here in Illinois, we got fabulous soil. Excellent. I mean, it's just, I grew up in Kansas and the soil wasn't half as good as it is here. It's just wonderful black soil. So you can't go wrong with that.
Has industrial farming messed it up though yet?
Well, I'm talking about in my yard, which has never been farmed. Yeah, the industrial farming, if you walk off my property into the industrial farming land, it's just loaded with chemicals, and it's not the same. No, it's, in fact, I'm not even sure I would want that soil, because it would take so much time to build it up to a healthy, not that it can't be done, but I'm spoiled. I have really, really good soil. So, and like I say, if you walk off my land, you can see where it's eroded, and you dig it up, and it's like really heavy, thick clay because of all the erosion and all the compaction. And like I said, I don't know how much the chemicals have played a role, but it just doesn't seem very healthy compared to my yard and my garden, which is pretty healthy. It's not perfect, but it's pretty healthy. So yeah, I'm pretty disappointed. with the agriculture around me. There's a lot of chemicals around me. I just got a 3-acre plot out in the middle of farm country, so it's always a problem dealing with farm chemicals.
Because one of the permaculture principles is like biodiversity, right? And each thing
Yes.
plays a part. But when you have industrial farming, they don't do any of that, you know.
No, there is no diversity. They don't want diversity at all. They want a monocrop. As soon as they have diversity, what that usually means is they've got insects they don't want, or weeds they don't want, and then they become immune to the herbicide, and then they got to come up with a stronger herbicide, and it just goes on and on. So it's frustrating to me. I've had damage to some of my trees before because of the spray, and some of these guys, when they spray, they just don't care. As long as they don't get reported to the state, the EPA, they'll just do whatever they want, and that's what I've seen. Now the local farmers, they don't do that because they care about their relationship with their neighbors. But some of the companies that do the spraying, I've had to turn them in a couple times now, and they got cited just because they were stupid and careless and didn't care, But that's part of dealing with the area like this. So anyway.
What do you have at your house, in the garden, and animals and stuff?
So we have chickens and guineas, and that's it now, and some dogs and a few cats. But that's
no bees anymore.
I still have bees, but they're over at Stell. In fact, I was just over there this morning opening up a queen cage to let a queen out. So, because I've had so much trouble with the queens these days, keeping the queens alive, especially in the spring. There's so many pressures on bees. It's nothing like it was when I started. I think I started like in '88, keeping bees, and it's just so much more difficult now, just trying to keep the hives alive. There's viruses, there's mites, there's chemicals, I don't know, there's this neonicotinoid pesticide that they put on the seed that these farmers use. It's really toxic to bees. It's been banned in Europe, but the US is like, we don't operate that way, unfortunately. It's like whatever big corporations want, pretty much they get. So anyway. Yeah, so in our yard we have a big garden. We also have a lot of perennial plants. Like I say, right now we have a lot of asparagus, and we have a lot of rhubarb. In fact, Joe, if you want some, you should come over and get some, because we got more than we can eat. But we got lettuce, and sometimes it's still early. Most things are just starting to come up. But we basically, from the standpoint of a garden, we pretty much raise just about any vegetable you would find in the grocery store, or either raise it or have raised it, except for tropical plants. We can't do that here, so we don't. But just about anything you could find, I'd say, in terms of including herbs. And I don't know, I'm spoiled, eating out of the garden and with fresh herbs and things like that is just, you can't beat it. It's really hard to go to any restaurant and find quality of ingredients that are better than what I can just get right out of my own yard and taste. So just from a nutritional value, they're better, and the taste is better too. So it's work, yeah, but like I said, I need the exercise because I'm usually sitting on the computer all day, and when I'm working anyway. So lately I've been out of work, but nothing to do with the virus, but at least initially. But I do need the exercise, so it's good to go out and work in the garden.
Do you even spend money on groceries, hardly?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, Gia, my wife, she likes Asian food, of course, because she grew up in Asia. And so a lot of the Asian foods we either don't grow, or the bigger thing is that in where she grew up, and actually almost all of Asia where I've been, everybody eats fresh food every day. They don't really eat canned foods and processed foods typically. So that's hard to do here in the Midwest because in the wintertime. So this time of year, it's a little tough to always get so much fresh food. It's easier now. When I was a kid, you couldn't, in the Midwest, once it was winter, you didn't see fruit. You might have seen oranges and bananas, and apples, and that was about it. There was nothing else. Now, you can go to the grocery store and get just about anything you want any time of year. That's kind of that's just not how it used to be. But that all has to do with our globalized food system, which, who knows, maybe is going to come to a, I don't know, it's going to slow down, I'm guessing. We'll see. But no, we don't raise everything. So we don't really raise any of our meat. But like I say, we've got a relationship with the Mint Creek Farm over here, so we get a lot of our meat from them, and we do trades, this and that. I mean, I have a fabulous water well, one of the best water wells in the area, according to the guy who dug it. And so I trade him water for meat and chicken feed, basically. So we kind of do a little barter thing, and it saves him money, saves me money, and we both come out ahead. But we usually get our meat from him, so it's very local. I mean, it's just a mile away. Sometimes if he has for example, getting back to self-resiliency, whenever Harry has an animal that gets hurt, like was it last fall? I think he had a pig it had a hernia, a really bad hernia, which usually that can cause them to get sick and intestine. It could crimp their intestine and then cause them to get poisoned and die. So anyway, he says, Mark, you want this pig? You can have it, for like $40 or whatever it was, because he didn't think it was going to survive, and he didn't want to take the chance with it, and it was like a 60-pound pig or something. So we just got it and butchered it, and a friend of mine and I, and so then we had a pig. But he also had a beef that broke its leg, and it was a young one. He didn't know what to do with it. He couldn't take it anywhere, so I butchered that too. So anyway, that's just give you an idea. Going back to, like I said, how I grew up. This was, for me, that's kind of like second nature, but most people don't do that. So anyway, that's kind of on the meat end. But from a dairy standpoint, there are people around here who do dairy. We have a neighbor over here who used to sell some raw milk, for example. We usually just buy that in the store. So we don't eat much processed food at all, though, to be honest. It's mostly fresh. But then grains are another thing. Grains aren't worth raising. There's way too much work in a garden as far as I'm concerned. So we don't raise anything that would be a grain, or really any kind of dry beans. Those crops can be produced so efficiently with a mechanized system that unless you just really want to do it and you're just really excited about that, it's not worth it. So for example, sweet corn, we never would raise sweet corn. There's so much sweet corn around us with all the farmers that it just makes more sense for me to, like, hey, how about if I trade you some honey for some sweet corn? Or usually they're just like, just take it. We got way too much. Go ahead. And like neighbor over here, when they're done with theirs, they got like, way more than they're going to eat. So we go in and we pick about, I don't know, 15, maybe 20 dozen ears of corn, bring them home, cook them outside in a pot under some wood fire. We're pretty basic in that regard. Keeps the heat out of the house in the summer. But and then we bring it in and we cut all the kernels off the ear and put it in bags and put it in the freezer. So we got corn that it usually lasts maybe 2 years. After that, it doesn't keep more than 2 years, I'd say. So anyway, that's just another thing. So we just kind of live off the local land in that regard when we can. Of course, some things, obviously, things like we like to eat a lot of seafood, so that's obviously something you got to buy. It's not something you're going to get around here. So just to answer your question about what do we raise and when it comes to veg, if you come around here in like August, when the garden is like bursting with food and we can't possibly eat it all, then we're not probably buying too much. Although we do drink like the coffee and tea and things like that, so that's obviously coming from somewhere else. So basically anything tropical we can't raise, we don't.
So with everything going on with COVID, a lot more people seem to be getting interested in growing their own food. Do you have any tips, or like in this climate, what are some basic stuff? You said asparagus, that would be easy to grow and nutritional.
My personal advice to anybody who wants to start a garden is, first you go look at what is it that I like to eat. Because one thing I learned in the community garden was, if people don't want to eat it, they're not going to pick it and eat it. So first thing you do is you figure out, okay, what do I really want to eat? And that's the things you would want to focus on, I would say. And then once you once you've done that, what I would recommend is you figure out, okay, how much of that do I eat? And then based on that, you could, of those items that you like, you could figure out how much of each in your garden to plant. So, I mean, to me, that's the way to do it, because what people will do is they'll maybe plant, I mean, I see people do this all the time. They'll plant all tomatoes. Okay, now, yeah, maybe they like tomatoes. Maybe they're going to can the tomatoes. And great, maybe they're going to make their own spaghetti sauce. I don't know. Maybe they're just going to plant peppers and tomatoes and buy some onions and they're done. And you could do that. But my experience is it's a whole lot better to have a diverse garden, because every year some things are going to do well and some things are not. It's going to be weather dependent. So that's one of the reasons we have a very diverse garden, is that so okay, some years the sweet potatoes did great, but the I don't know, the broccoli was horrible. Actually broccoli doesn't do very well here because the weather's too erratic in the spring and it gets too hot sometimes. But anyway, there's my advice is, if you're in the city and you have a tough time with land, that's when I really would look at community gardening personally. Where I live, that's not necessary because there's plenty of land available, but that's not always the case, especially for a lot of the younger people who don't have property. But there's plenty of places in cities that have where there's land that could be made available, and like I say, it's more fun to be working with other people. And despite even with this virus going on, at least you're outside and you can maintain distancing a lot easier. So the trick is to have some knowledge of what it is you need to do for each particular type of food that you want to raise. In a permaculture design, for example, you would put the crops that you would pick maybe once or twice during the season and put them off in a distance, the furthest distance from your house. And then you would put the crops that you would like pick maybe every day close to the house. So for example, that would mean that your herb garden would be like, you reach out the door and you can almost reach it, or you walk out the door and it's right there. So in our case, we got a lot of our herbs just on the north side of the house. You walk out of the door and boom, it's right there. You get what you need. You come in with the thyme or the basil or whatever, and you got what you need. And then you'd put your lettuce a little further away. I mean, this is how permaculture would be done to try and minimize, basically, like I say, in permaculture, you're trying to maximize your energy storage and minimize the consumption at the same time. So that kind of goes hand in hand. So something like asparagus, like you mentioned, is kind of in the middle ground, because when it is producing, you need to harvest it every day. But when it's not producing, you don't need to do anything with it. And so it produces now mine will produce, well, it'll produce all summer, but you really don't want to pick it all summer, because you'll basically kill it if you pick it all, because the roots will never replenish. So you usually have to stop around the 1st of July, thereabouts. So you start in the 1st of May and you can pick until the 1st of July. But anyway, that's how you would lay it out in a permaculture design. But again, I mean, getting back to your question, I would say figure out what you like to eat, and that's what you should plant. And try to plan your garden around how much of that, so it doesn't go to waste. So let's say you have all tomatoes, and then, well, I got too many tomatoes, I'm never going to use all these tomatoes. And then you find that all your neighbors planted tomatoes too, because tomatoes are easy, but nobody has any onions. Okay, and onions actually in this area are quite easy to raise. So, and of course you need to plan it in advance, because some things, I mean, onions would be a good example. If you want to start them from seeds, you need to do that in this area back in February, thereabouts, and then let them sprout, and then by this time they're ready to transplant. But you can buy them in the store too. I mean, usually you can buy these kinds of things in the store. But the big thing usually, I think, for most people these days is finding access to land. That's my guess. You tell me. I really don't know, because I'm spoiled. So what do you guys think?
I definitely couldn't start a garden right now. Like I don't have any kind of land. So.
Jess is in Orange, California, so it's pretty populated there, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a whole yard. I
Yeah.
have a section that I plan to turn into a garden. I just haven't.
Yeah. Yeah. And the nice thing about permaculture now is that you don't necessarily, I mean, there are people who've taken their yard and turned the entire thing into a food producing garden using permaculture principles. It's really cool. Um, as long as your community will allow you to do that, you know, in some of the cities, they don't allow that. They won't allow you to have like food producing plants in the front yard. But some food, you got that problem.
Right.
But so,
I was gonna say I have a neighbor just down the way. They have a whole garden in the front. We've got neighbors with chickens in the front yard. So here it's more accepted.
good, good. Yeah. In some places it's not. That's probably more in the suburbs. If you're, in my opinion, you're better off if you're in an older community or in a small town because the soil's going to be better. In the suburbs, my understanding is when they build these suburbs, they go in and they scrape all the soil off the top, pretty much, and then they build the house, and then they sell the soil and put about a third of it back. So you don't have a very good topsoil base other than just enough to graze a lawn.
Horrible lawn here. We used to be an agricultural community. They used to grow oranges and citrus here. Then
Mhm.
after they kind of sucked everything out, they put in the track housing.
Yeah, yeah, that's unfortunate because that means that not much soil is available. You know, I remember laughing at Dave Bloom, who was from Santa Cruz, which would be north of you, but he was his comment was, well, yeah, they took the Central Valley or what portion? I can't think of where it was exactly. Maybe the San Jose Valley. I think that's where it was, where it was a big agriculture area. And he says the best thing they did there was they paved the whole thing with parking lots because now in the future we can take all the parking lot off and all that really great soil is still going to be there because we're going to need it. Maybe he's right. I don't know, but soil is a big issue, and you have to build it. Soil is really the heart of the garden. If you don't have good soil, it's really hard to have a good garden.
And that's why I don't have a garden because I'd have to set up a raised bed and bring in my own soil because our soil is very rocky and compacted, very clay-like.
Yeah, well, maybe you can figure out what kind of plants you could put in there that will work in that soil. I'll just give you an example. We were in South Africa one time on a vacation, and we stayed at this vineyard, and I walked around the farm. I don't know if I've ever seen soil so bad in my life. It looked horrible. It was just clay and rocks and sloped, but boy, they had the best wine. It was fabulous. So some plants don't mind that, interestingly enough. And grapes are obviously one of them if you have the right kind of soil. Tomatoes are another one. Tomatoes don't seem to care too much how good the soil is. Interesting. Sometimes it seems like the better the soil, the worse they do, because then they grow too much leaf and not enough fruit. So some plants almost like they need to be like stimulated to put out the fruit rather than just grow a whole bunch of leaves. So anyway, in your case, I've never tried to garden in Southern California, so I wouldn't know.
Horrible.
Well, you know what the thing I would do in your case though, I would find somebody who does, who has a lot of experience. In your case, in your example, for example, look up Ruth Stout. Ruth Stout, Stout. She was such a character. She wrote books about gardening, and she actually then I'm pretty sure. Oh no, that's not Ruth. She wasn't in Southern California. It was oh God, what the hell is this lady's name? She wrote a bunch of some spiritual books, but she had a big garden area, and I'm thinking of somebody else. But Ruth Stout is someone you could look at because she basically used mulch, really heavy mulch for everything, and that's the basis for her gardening. And it wasn't so much as based on the soil as it was on the usage of all the mulch. So maybe you can do something like that. But anyway, she was such a character. She used to garden naked, and all the men would drive by, and then of course there'd be these lines of cars out there while she's out there gardening.
Hey, isn't World Naked Gardening Day coming up?
It could be. I don't know.
Go look that up.
I don't think you want to see me do that. So, anyway.
Well, actually, it was yesterday. We missed it.
Oh, we missed it.
Yeah.
Well, it worked for her. I guess I figure if she ever needed some help in the garden, she probably didn't have any trouble getting any help.
There you go. That's nice.
Anyway, my recommendation is for somebody in an area that I'm not familiar with. I wouldn't want to really give you too much advice because I don't know your area, but go find somebody who does. You'll find somebody who does permaculture classes, for example, in your area. Now, I'm sure you've got people out there who are really into it and know all about it and would, take a tour of somebody's yard who's already done it. The biggest challenge I've seen with people's yards, in terms, if you have a yard, is that there's too much shade. It's not that you can't grow things if there's some shade, but but it makes it more challenging. You do need to have some, usually like 6 hours of sunlight in the morning is what I've concluded is like the minimum. That's the morning is always the best. The plants like the sun in the morning. If they get the equivalent amount of sun in the afternoon, but not in the morning, most plants don't do as well in the garden. They like the morning sun in particular. But usually you need at least like 6 hours. Some plants can't handle more than like 7 hours of heavy sunlight, like squash plants. That's why you see squash plants, and in the morning their leaves are up like this, and it's like that, I guess, and then in the afternoon they go like that. So that's because they've just absorbed so much sunlight they can't take anymore, and they have to cut it off. They got to take a break for the day, you might say. So, but all plants are different. So, and in your case, even when the soil's bad, a lot of times you can grow trees or bushes. And around here, one of the easiest fruits to raise would be vines, like blackberries. I've had excellent results with blackberries. Currants, raspberries do well here, and they're a perennial. All you got to do is go out and prune them. Ideally, you would keep them mulched, and they're great food. There's lots of different kinds of berries you can plant, and actually you can mix them in with, in a permaculture design. You'd mix them in with your tree. You'd have, like in your case in California, I would plant citrus. I would definitely be planting subtropical trees. There's no question in my mind. I'd be planting persimmons. I can't raise them here. I can raise a native persimmon, which is not really exactly a good persimmon. I have a tree, but they're nothing like what you can raise in California, like a persimmon. You might even be able to raise avocado. Avocado is a huge tree, but a persimmon's a small tree. You could raise persimmons. Definitely, you could raise citrus. Citrus are generally small trees, And the thing about in a permaculture design, think about how the forest is designed. You see the big trees, and in front of them, that's where you see the bushes. That's where you see so you get the big tree over here. I forgot how this works. And then you got the bushes out in front, like the vines and the blackberries and whatnot. And so there's enough sun at the side of the tree to give the other plants enough sunlight. In permaculture, you would call that stacking. Basically, you're stacking one on top of another, and they're both still able to harvest light. You could do this in a perennial design. You could do this in your flower beds. We have flower beds like this later. We got the tulips come in first, and then next to them is the peonies, and they're taller, and then the next one of those are the tiger lilies, and they're really tall. And so you get a bloom across, at least in the case of our driveway, in our case, that you get blooms all season because of the way the flowers have been stacked into that flow, if you will, without having any negative impact on the other ones. Because the tulips grow up, they put out their bloom, they're in the leaf for a while, they need to catch some sunlight, and then they go dormant. And by that time, the peonies are tall enough that they're getting into full bloom. And then the tiger lilies, in our case, are they don't take up a lot of sunlight space. They don't do a lot of shade. And so anyway, that's just an example of how you can set up your yard. And in your case, I would probably be thinking of trees and shrubs and vines and things to start with, and then in between that, then you could you see you don't maybe need so much dirt for other things like lettuce. Doesn't take up a lot of space, things like that. Some things take up a lot of space, and we're much better off. In your area, there's tons of food raised, I'm sure, around you, so you have plenty of access to food. It's not like you have to raise food. So in some areas, it's not quite as viable. I know, Joe, where you and I live, you got to drive a pretty good distance to get a lot of food.
Mm.
So, but in our case, for example, one thing I never plant is melons. They just take up too much space. They don't do well in my soil, And over by Kankakee, which is 30 miles away, they have massive truck farming melon operations. So why would I go grow melons? It's the same reason why would I grow sweet corn? Doesn't make any sense. It takes up way too much space in my garden. It does much better in a larger field. So anyway, but smaller things that you eat a lot of, like I say, probably for a lot of people, things like lettuce, kale, spinach. Kale does take up quite a bit of space, but certainly some of these other things, carrots, you can grow some of them in companions. That's another aspect of permaculture is companion planting. So we have an interesting case on our yard that we discovered just happened, and we didn't even plan for it, but it's like a perfect companion plant, and that's asparagus and cilantro. Somehow we got cilantro seeds in our asparagus bed. And what happens is the asparagus, like right now, is popping up, and you need to harvest them because otherwise they'll take over and you can't find the new ones. And anyway, there's no harm in harvesting them, like I said, for 2 months. Well, probably in about 2 weeks, the cilantro is going to start to grow in there. And the cilantro is going to be almost like a ground cover. And the asparagus is going to grow up right through it, and you won't even hardly notice the cilantro. I mean, it won't have any impact at all on the asparagus. Now, cilantro doesn't have a very long life. Not too much longer, it will go to seed, become coriander, and then the plant dies. That's probably going to happen like around July. But by that time, we're going to let the asparagus go to leaf, which interesting to me. A lot of people have no idea what a leafed out asparagus plant looks like. It's a really cool looking plant, actually. Some of mine get it. It's over 6 feet tall, where the soil's really good. But basically, by that time, I don't care what happens to the cilantro because it's already gone to seed. It doesn't matter if it gets covered by the asparagus. So it's a really interesting, application of companion planting. But you can do the same thing on your own. I mean, you can plant certain types of plants together and put them in time sequence, or put them in and sometimes you can put in other plants. My wife likes to plant marigolds in the garden because they'll attract some of the insects and keep them away from other plants. So, I mean, there's a lot to this. That's why I say if you're not knowledgeable of it and you want to get your feet wet, I recommend getting in with a group of other people who have some experience at least. Nice thing is you got the internet. You can always look up all sorts of solutions that people have, and you're going to come up with lots of great ideas. So,
are there any good books that you recommend, like overall about it?
Oh, I think from a design standpoint, there's a lot of good permaculture books. I haven't read any for quite a while. Boy, I think if I was going to do that right now, I would just go online and let's say, for instance, I wanted to do permaculture for home gardening. I'd probably just go online and look for reviews on permaculture books, for example.
Okay.
To be honest, I couldn't tell you anymore. I haven't read any of those books for a long time, and the ones I have are either too in depth, maybe. Like Bill Mollison's Permaculture Encyclopedia. You don't want to buy that for $100. That was part of our class. But at that time, that was the main book. But these days, there's a lot of other books. There's just so much information online that, I honestly, I think you're better off. Well, yeah, that's a good route to take. Yeah. But I would go online and just do the search for what you're looking for, to be honest. But again, it's good to talk to somebody. And the thing about gardening, like I said, is it's really local to your climate. So that's why I can't really tell you. Joe, if you had questions, I'd be happy to answer. But Jess, you've got questions in California. I could give you some suggestions, but I'd hate to lead you wrong. My sister's in Oakland, and she was asking me about some things. All I can tell her is what I do. But her climate's going to be closer to mine than yours. So, and Eric, I don't know where you're located, but
actually, I'm just north of Kankakee. So.
Oh, you're north of Kankakee, so you'd be in the same situation that I've got. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm happy to answer questions about gardening all day long. I don't mind. It's just I don't want to give you the wrong information if you're in a different area.
So your bed and breakfast is open for camping?
Yeah, that's what we're going to do. Yeah, we haven't really pursued that yet. I need to go on Facebook and do some. I really don't do a lot of promotion anymore for it. It's just so hard to keep up with all of that. It's just really there's so much competition out there, and we never did get on Airbnb, which really hurt us. Initially, it wasn't really set up for businesses, but then they must have changed it, and so obviously they changed it. So, but it doesn't matter now, really. But camping we could do. So yeah, I think we're gonna probably miss doing the farm dinners. They're a lot of work, but boy, you meet some really great people, and the food is just some of the best meals I ever ate in my life. Oh my God, coming straight out of the gardens, and these chefs out of Chicago, some of them were just really good. So, oh well, maybe next year. Who knows? I don't know. No, but yeah, we're just gonna probably just do camping because it's a big yard and we got an outdoor bathroom and people can totally be on their own, and we can easily maintain a good distance outdoors from them and keep them safe and us.
I think I might take you up on that.
Yeah. So,
what else you been working on? You got a book now?
I did write a book. Yeah. I was actually part of my. I kind of wrote this book because I was kind of got talked into it. Actually, Joe, it's kind of partly because of you, because I don't know if you remember in 2018 you brought Alara over here, your friend Alara, and I gave you a tour of Stell, and then afterwards she says, Mark, I'll give you a numerology reading. So she did, and about the first thing she says to me, oh, you're supposed to write a book. And I'm like, at the minute she said it, I knew she was right. So
nice.
And then actually I had two other people told me basically the same thing shortly thereafter. And she pointed me to this fellow out in Sedona who has a program for how to write a book. And it turns out his technique was very similar to the kind of writing I had done in the past, which was quite interesting to me. I decided to go ahead and do it. And it ended up being a book about kind of my personal internal healing process, and a lot of the I would call it more of a metaphysical book than anything, having to do with healing at a metaphysical level, if you will. A lot of it pulled into a lot of the information that I had learned in all the years in Stell and reading spiritual books for years and years and years, which is about all I read for about 15 years. Yeah, I did just publish it. I'd never published a book before. I've been writing my whole life because I do technical writing and teaching, but I'd never published anything before. So that was an interesting project. You guys are probably familiar with that more than me, but I learned a lot about publishing. So
cool. Yeah, we'll link to it. What's it about? I mean,
what's it about?
Yeah.
Exactly. It's basically about my views of how we get caught up in our patterns and beliefs and how they kind of run us and how we can break loose of those things. That's basically because I'm a technical guy I've worked in technology most of my life and with an engineering and math background. It's to me, I kind of look at this more from I'm not sure how to describe it. It's kind of to me, it was like a marriage between somewhere in between science and spirituality. I was trying to border that gap, if you will, or bridge that gap, I mean, in this particular book. And in this particular writing process, you sit down and you just basically kind of open up to what wants to be written, and then you just basically clear your mind and write. And so that's what I did. And what was very interesting about it was so many ideas that I had over the past 3 decades just kind of popped into my head. And so I just wrote them. I just wrote the whole sequence in like 4 days and it was done. So, but that's this guy's process. Tom Bird, that's the guy's name. So that's his process for how to. And Alara is the one who told me about him. So it was interesting that that's how I ended up doing this. So.
She's supposed to be on the show soon. I mean, in a couple of weeks, talking about numerology and stuff. So.
Oh, good for her. Yeah. She's a good numerologist. I will say that. I was very impressed.
Yeah, she's awesome. So the process was what would you say? Writing in 4 days, or?
Well, it depends on how long your book is. In my case, it's not very long. It's like a 80 some page book. It's not particularly long, but it's basically when it's done, and I didn't have anything more to write. So I just stopped. And then I was really, really busy with work and health problems. And then I got laid off back in December. And so I had time to finish it. So I finally finished it. So, but anyway, that's really what it's kind of like. My for me, it's a very personal book. I'm kind of hesitant to even talk about it, but if you read it, you'll know what I'm talking about. But it was my internal process, basically, my internal thoughts that I don't hardly ever talk to anybody about ever. So, but they're all published to the world now if anybody wants to look at it. So,
Good to get it out.
yeah, it's out. I'm not sure if anything will ever happen with it, but at least it's done, and it was an interesting process. So
Cool. What's it called?
I haven't promoted it. I haven't pushed it. I'm not. I got plenty of other things to do in my life. I don't anticipate. I've learned enough about books that the chances of like earning an income off of books is pretty slight.
Yeah.
So I'm not worried about any of that. Maybe somebody somewhere along the line will see the world kind of like I do. To me, the book is for people who have like a technical background, but also are interested in spirituality, but don't want to get caught up in what the church is. Like I grew up Catholic, and it's just, well, it's a mystery. It's a mystery. It's, mysteries aren't good enough for me. I'd like to have a little more content. So that's the approach that this book takes. It's called Finding Inner Freedom. It's really about letting go of the things that hold you back. So
cool. Do you have any last tips about sustainability and self-reliance in these uncertain times?
In these times, well, I think for most people, it probably has more to do with finding some peace within themselves, because I think a lot of people, they're really stressed, you know. So I think, honestly, I think my tip in that regard was, if you're not familiar, maybe you want to look at some of the work of the Heart Math Institute. I've been involved with them, and Jess, it sounds like maybe you're familiar with them.
Yes, I am familiar.
What do you think? But they have some excellent programs. I've met the people there, have been there a couple times, and they're just wonderful people, and I love what they do. And it's been very good at helping people get de-stressed. Now, if you want to add something. No, you agree.
I agree.
You agree. Okay. So, I mean, in this particular situation, I think that's probably what's facing people more. Honestly, I think we're going to head into some very serious economic problems. I think they've only begun. And that's a whole nother topic, you know. So I'm not an expert, but I've spent the last 10 years trying to understand how this crazy system we have works. And I've learned a lot about it. And in fact, I just got done putting together like a curriculum for my family that I want to send them, to say, okay, here's all the things that I wish I had learned in college and high school about the economy that I've learned in the past 10 years by watching people who really are successful in it and how it really works. Not investing, but how the darn thing works. And I think my personal opinion is, if everybody in the country knew how it really works, we would change it in a lot of really big ways, so it would help the average person, rather than just the people who know how to play the system and get really wealthy off of it. Anyway,
so maybe some positive changes will come from this, hoping.
Oh yeah, in the long run, yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think we're going to relocalize. I think we're going to be forced to. I think people are going to wake up and say, you know what, we're not going to make all of our drugs in India and China anymore. This is just stupid. And I'm not a big fan of drugs, but there are times you need them, you know. And so, I mean, that's going to change, and all of everything being made overseas. And honestly, I think that we're going to wake up to a lot more truth, I hope, because of the access to the internet. That, you know, we got a lot of problems out there with trying to understand what's true and what's not. But things like this can really shed a lot of light on what's not been right. And one of the things, in my view, that's not been right and is accepted wholeheartedly is how our financial system works. Because in my view, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work well for the average person at all. I mean, I'll just give you an example. I mean, you look at the headlines right now today. We've got meat processing plants that are shut down. Farmers are killing their animals because they can't get them slaughtered. The prices of meat in the stores skyrocketing. We've got 30% employment, which is the highest unemployment we've ever had in the country's history. Okay. We have all of these breakdowns in all of these industries that are just like going bankrupt and asking for bailouts from the federal government. And at the same time, the stock market is almost at record highs. Now, the stock market is supposed to be there to tell you the strength of businesses. obviously something is broken. So what is it? And I think most people don't understand the system well enough to understand what's actually broken. That's my sense of it. I could be wrong, but something is clearly broken when when you have a situation like that. It makes absolutely no sense. So, but if you print enough money, you can make it look like it's right, and that's basically what we're doing. But history shows that you just can't print money forever and solve all your problems. You have to actually have work. You have to, put in your labor. You have to produce things, and you have to be honest. Something that we've really lost in my lifetime. I think it's just integrity is missing, and it's so different than when I was young. I think about these things. It's like, my goodness, our society has changed so much. I never had to think about people really just out to swindlers all the time. And when I was a kid, the neighbors I had, they would never, if anybody was like that, they would be so ostracized in the community, nobody would have anything to do with them. So the average person, I mean, when things happen, let's say, for instance, you ended up in the hospital or something because you got hurt, all your neighbors are going to bring you cooked food for a month, until you get back on your feet, or you had a baby. People were always bringing food to the family and this kind of thing. And there was always all this support, community-wide. Maybe that's still out there and I'm just too isolated, but it seems like we're, that's just an example to me of what's kind of been lost. Our financial system is something I was writing in this document I put together. It's like, when I was a kid, you put your money in the bank, you get paid a bit of interest. The bank made loans out to people for their own businesses. And then you could put money in the stock market and invest in a company, or you could put money in the bond market and you could, invest in your country, basically. But now there's just a million different places where money goes, and it's very complicated. And there's instruments created that all these securities and things that really they weren't necessary 40 years ago. I don't know why they're necessary now. That's my opinion. So, I mean, we'd be better off without some of that stuff, I think, and just get more down to basics and what people, good hard work and understanding what's really needed in our life. I think this crisis is really pointing to that. It's like, okay, who really matters? Healthcare, food, these kinds of things. Somebody who can fix my furnace, this kind of stuff. Not somebody who can educate me. Some of this stuff is, and the sad part about that is the people who are still pulling money in out of this financial system are all got jobs because they can all work remotely, and all the poor people who wait tables, they're in trouble. So
and designers and marketers like Eric and I, not that essential.
well, that's true. That's but I'm thinking more like the bankers. I mean, like these guys. I don't know. One of the things that I've studied a lot is cryptocurrency. And when we adopt cryptocurrency, which is coming, I don't know how long it's going to take. As far as I can tell, half of the financial system is going to just go away because it's not going to be needed anymore, because cryptocurrency is going to completely replace it, especially the banking system. It's just going to be like, you don't need it. It's all, it's all on the internet and on your thumb drive. Let's face it. I mean, it's so simple in that regard. So anyway,
Yeah.
that couldn't come too soon to me, as long as it's designed correctly, because designed in the wrong hands, like I'm sure will happen, for example, with the Chinese government, they'll have total control over everybody's bank account. We don't want that.
Yeah.
I spent too much time in China working on it. You don't want to live under that type of totalitarian rule. I don't.
Things are going to get interesting, that's for sure.
Yep. Yeah, I think we're still in the early stages of this, and it's not easy to come out of this. And there's no way for our economy to just completely, jump right back. And there's still a lot we don't know about this disease. I've spent a lot of time, because I was out of work. I spent a lot of time looking at it and looking at the science behind it, and the medical papers and all sorts of things. And there's just still a lot that we don't know, and a lot that we do know that we're not really doing very well, in my view. I don't know why we can't just follow the lead of countries that have done really well with this, like South Korea. Czech Republic has done a really good job of dealing with this. Taiwan has done a really good job of dealing with this because they've had this experience before and they know what to do, but we're not. Of course, our cultures are different, but still, we could take what they've learned and apply it much better, and we would have never had to lock our economy down. I don't think Taiwan didn't, South Korea didn't, Czech Republic. I don't think they really did, but they're all wearing masks to keep the spread down. So, I mean, there's just simple things to do that could have been a lot better, but we didn't do those things. And one of our biggest challenges in this country, though, is that we're just so globally connected. We had so many people here who were infected before anything could even be done because we didn't even know about it yet. So, once that cat's out of the bag, it's obviously pretty hard to put it back in.
Cool.
So,
Anyone else have anything else to say? We can wrap it up.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining us, Mark. It's been a pleasure. We should do it again sometime.
Yeah, if you want to, absolutely.
I mean, I think we could talk for hours and hours. So much.
Well, yeah, I guess I can. I feel like I dominated everything here.
No,
there's a lot of good info.
Well, there's a lot more than that we could talk about, but
yeah,
whatever you choose. Okay, yeah, it's great. Thanks for the opportunity. I really enjoyed it. I haven't done something like this for a long time. It's been a long time since I've done like a permaculture tour, so this would be the closest to that. Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome.
Yes. Thank you so much for teaching us.
Well, hopefully learn something. Good.
I want to do one of those stall tours someday.
Well, yeah, you have to come. I have to be a personal tour because I don't think they do tours of Stell much anymore. Maybe they do. I don't know. I used to give some of the tours, but I usually talked about the historical perspectives. But I just went over quite a few of the historical perspectives here. At least the parts that I liked. I'm not going to get into some of the other stuff that doesn't really matter much to me, but those are the things that inspired me. I was kind of sad to see when they didn't. It's really hard to keep that alive, though, especially if you they opened the community, and so people would move in just because of cheap house.
Oh.
Well, when you get that, they don't have. There's people there now, I'm sure, have no idea of the stuff I just talked about. Never heard of any of it, probably. So, but I was there at the right time, and I'm happy that I was because it was a fabulous experience. I thought. I mean, it was so. It was just really invigorating and intellectually stimulating, and not just intellectually, but stimulating on many levels. Okay, well, thanks for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Mark.
You guys have a good day.
Yep, you too.